Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Super English Talks. My name is Jara, and I am so happy that you are here with me today. Thank you for spending some of your time to listen, relax, and learn English in a calm and enjoyable way. This podcast is not only about grammar or vocabulary. It is about stories that help you feel English, not just study it. Today, we're going to do something special. We are going to take a journey together, a journey back in time. We will visit a moment in American history that was very difficult for many people, but also full of hope, courage, and strong hearts. It is a story about a family, about dreams, and about the strength it takes to start again when life becomes hard. Have you ever had a dream that felt too far away? A dream that made you tired but you kept going anyway? Or have you ever had to leave your home, everything and everyone you love, to search for a better future? If you have, then you will understand this story deeply. Because this story is not only about the past. It's about us, about what it means to be human, to hope, and to begin again. So, take a deep breath. Find a quiet and comfortable place.
Close your eyes if you want to.
Let the words flow through you. Feel the pictures forming in your mind. Imagine the warm sun touching your skin. Imagine the dry wind, the smell of dust, and the sound of distant birds. And now, let's travel together to the wide open lands of America, to a place called Oklahoma, and meet a young boy named Leo, whose life was about to change forever. Before the dust came, life was simple. It was calm, quiet, and full of routine. For 10-year-old Leo, the world was no bigger than his family's farm. That small piece of land was everything he knew. Fields of golden wheat, rows of tall corn, and a small wooden house that stood proudly in the middle. Every morning began the same way. There was no alarm clock. Leo woke up to the soft golden light of sunrise. The light slipped gently through the window of the small room he shared with his little sister, Clara. The air in the room was cool and fresh. It smelled of earth, grass, and growing plants, the smell of life itself. Outside, the fields waited quietly under the morning sky. Leo always looked out the window first. He could see his father, Thomas, already working in the fields. Thomas was a tall, quiet man who moved slowly and carefully, as if the land and his body understood each other perfectly. Every step he took, every tool he used, had a rhythm, steady, patient, full of love for the soil beneath his feet. He knew his farm the way a sailor knows the sea. He could touch a stalk of wheat and tell if it would grow strong or weak. He could feel the wind and know if rain was coming. Inside the house, Leo's mother, Sarah, was always in the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. It was a smell that made Leo feel safe. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room, but it was warm, bright, and full of life. The walls were simple wood, and the floor sometimes creaked when you walked across it. But to Leo, it was the most beautiful home in the world. On the table, his mother would place a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, and she would smile when Leo and Clara came in for breakfast. Their father would join them soon, washing the dust from his hands, and they would eat together, talking about the animals, the weather, and the plans for the day. Everything felt safe. Everything felt certain. But Leo didn't know that the world was changing. He didn't know that the winds were slowly drying the land, that the rains would stop coming, and that soon, the fields that fed them would turn into endless dust. This was the calm before the storm. This was before the dust came, before Leo's world was blown away by the wind. and before his family began their long, hard journey toward a new beginning. The house was not big. It was not fancy, but it was filled with a quiet kind of love. The kind of love you don't always see or hear, but you can feel in every small thing. In the soft smile of a mother, in the steady hands of a father, in the laughter of two children playing under the sun. Leo's days were full of little jobs. Small, simple tasks that made him feel important. Every morning, he went outside to feed the chickens. They gathered around his feet, their feathers soft and warm. They clucked and pecked at the ground, and Leo laughed when they chased each other for bits of food. After that, he helped his father in the fields. He carried heavy buckets of water that sometimes made his small arms shake, but he never complained. His father, Thomas, didn't talk much, but when he did speak, Leo always listened. Sometimes Thomas would stop and kneel down. He would scoop up a handful of soil and say, "Look, son, you see how the soil is dark and rich? That's what we want. It means the land is healthy. It will take care of us, as long as we take care of it." Leo believed him completely. To him, the land was not just dirt and plants. It was family. It fed them. It gave them work. It gave them a future. It was their silent partner in life. In the afternoons, when the sun was high and hot, Leo and his little sister Clara played under the big oak tree near the house. The tree was old and wide, with thick branches that made cool, deep shade. To Leo and Clara, that tree was magical. Some days it was a castle, and they were brave knights defending it from dragons. Other days, it was a tall ship sailing through an ocean of green fields. Their games were simple, but their laughter could be heard all the way to the fields. Life was not easy, but it was good. They didn't have much money, and their clothes were often patched and worn, but they always had enough to eat. They had bread on the table, a roof above their heads, and warm beds to sleep in. Most importantly, they had each other, and they had hope. To Leo, the future looked clear and simple. One day, he would grow up and take care of the farm, just like his father. Clara would help his mother, and life would continue just as it always had. The fields would grow, the seasons would turn, and the sun would rise again and again. It seemed like nothing could ever change. But the world was already beginning to shift. The sky was about to turn against them. The same land that had given them everything was slowly preparing to take it all away. The wind, once a gentle friend that cooled their faces on hot days, was about to become their greatest enemy. The time of peace and simplicity was ending. The dust was coming. At first, no one noticed. It started slowly, so slowly that people didn't think much about it. The summers in Oklahoma had always been hot, and rain had always been precious. But this year, something was different. The heat felt heavier, almost angry. It pressed down on the land, day after day, week after week. The sky, which was usually bright and endless blue, started to fade. It looked pale and tired, as if the color itself had been baked away by the sun. And then the rain stopped, completely. Leo began to notice the worry on his father's face. The quiet confidence that Thomas always had was replaced by a deep line around his mouth. He would stand at the edge of the fields each evening, his hat in his hand, staring up at the empty sky. His shoulders no longer stood straight. He looked smaller somehow, as if the land he loved was beginning to turn its back on him. The dark, rich soil that had once been soft and full of life was turning pale and dry. When Leo walked across the field, the ground didn't feel smooth anymore. It felt rough and sharp, like walking on tiny pieces of broken glass. The corn stalks that should have been tall and green were now short and yellow. Their leaves curled up tightly, dry and fragile. They looked like they were begging for water. Let's pause for a moment and learn a new word. The word is brittle, spelled brittle.
Brittle.
Something that is brittle is hard, but it breaks very easily. Imagine a dry leaf in the autumn. When you pick it up, it feels firm at first, but if you squeeze it, it shatters into tiny pieces. That leaf is brittle. The soil on Leo's farm had become brittle. It was hard, but it was weak. It looked strong, but it was dying. This is a powerful word, brittle, and it tells us something important, not just about the land, but about life. Sometimes, things look strong on the outside, but inside, they are breaking. That's what was happening to Leo's world. Slowly, silently, it was beginning to break apart. Let's think again about the word brittle. Can you think of something else that is brittle? Maybe a thin, old piece of plastic that cracks when you bend it, or a cookie that snaps cleanly in half when you break it. That is brittle, hard on the outside, but easy to break. The opposite of brittle would be something like strong or flexible, something that can bend without breaking. Leo's world, which had once felt strong and safe, was becoming brittle, too, ready to break apart at any moment. And then, the wind began to blow. It was not the friendly wind that used to cool their faces on hot days. This wind was different. It had a strange sound, a low, sad sound, like an animal crying somewhere far away. And the worst part was, it never stopped. It blew all day and all night, a restless, lonely sound that filled the air. At first, the wind only picked up a little dust from the dry fields. Tiny clouds of brown soil danced and spun across the ground. Leo thought they looked almost pretty, like ghosts playing in the sunlight. But soon, the clouds grew larger and darker. They became thick walls of dust that hung in the air. The sunlight faded, and the sun turned into a pale, sickly orange ball. Leo's mother, Sarah, tried to fight the dust. She hung wet sheets over the windows and the doors, hoping to keep the dirt outside. But it was no use. The dust came anyway. It slipped through every crack and every tiny hole. By morning, a fine brown powder covered everything. The floor, the table, the chairs, even their beds. It covered their plates and food. When Leo woke up, he could taste it on his tongue. His throat felt dry and rough. The air itself seemed full of sand. The adults began to talk in quiet, worried voices. They used a new word, a word Leo had never heard before.
Drought.
Let's spell it together. DROUGHT.
Drought.
A drought is a long time, weeks, months, or even years, when no rain falls. No rain means no crops, no water for animals, no life. For farmers, it's one of the most frightening words there is. Because without rain, a farm cannot survive. Rain is the lifeblood of the land. Leo's father, Thomas, began meeting with other farmers. They gathered around the kitchen table, their faces dark with dust, their eyes red and tired. Leo would sit quietly nearby, pretending to draw, but he was really listening. "The wheat is gone," one man said in a tired voice. "Just blew away. Every last bit." Another man sighed. "My well is almost dry. I don't know what I'll give the animals to drink." These were strong men, men who had worked with their hands all their lives. But now, their voices trembled. They sounded afraid. It was a heavy fear, thick and silent, like the dust that filled the air around them. Then one Sunday afternoon, the first big storm came. Leo and his family had just returned from church. The morning had felt strange from the start. The sky was not blue. It was a dull, yellowish gray. There was no wind. The air felt still and heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Even the birds were quiet. Then, on the far western horizon, Leo saw it. At first, it looked like a dark line stretching across the land. But as it came closer, it grew taller, higher than the trees, higher than anything Leo had ever seen. It looked like a wall, a moving wall of black and brown, rolling across the fields straight toward them. It was not a rain cloud. It was something else. Something alive. Something terrifying. His father saw it too. Thomas's eyes went wide. "Inside now," he shouted, his voice sharper than Leo had ever heard. The family ran toward the house. Thomas slammed the door and pushed Rags into the cracks at the bottom. Sarah grabbed little Clara and held her tight against her chest. And then it happened. Within minutes, the world outside disappeared. The bright afternoon turned into night. The sun was gone, completely gone, hidden behind the giant cloud of dust. The wind screamed and roared. The walls of the house shook. And the sound, oh, the sound, was like a freight train racing past their door. Loud, deep, endless. The dust storm had arrived. The Dust Bowl had begun. The wind hit the small wooden house with terrible force. It didn't just whistle. It pounded against the walls, shaking the whole house as if it wanted to tear it apart. Dust began to pour in through every tiny crack, around the windows, under the doors, even through the floorboards. It wasn't just dust anymore. It was like a brown fog, thick and heavy, filling the air inside their home. Soon it became hard to see. The light from the small lamp was swallowed up by the storm. Leo coughed and tried to cover his mouth, but his lungs filled with dry, choking air. Every breath burned. He could hear his sister Clara crying softly, her face pressed into their mother's dress. Sarah held her children close, trying to keep them safe in her arms as the house groaned and shook. The storm went on for hours. Long, endless hours that felt like days. The sound outside was deafening. A roar, a growl, a scream of the earth itself. It was as if the sky had turned against them. Leo sat on the floor, huddled together with his family in the darkness. He couldn't see his father's face, but he could feel his father's arm around him, strong, steady, unshakable. It was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that hadn't been torn away by the wind. Finally, after what felt like forever, the storm began to fade. The roar softened into a whisper. The darkness slowly turned gray. A weak, hazy light crept through the cracks. Thomas stood up and went to the door. When he opened it, the world they had known was gone. The bright, living farm of Leo's childhood had disappeared beneath a sea of dust. The fields of yellow corn gone. The green grass gone. Everything was hidden under a deep, soft blanket of brown powder. The fence posts were almost completely buried. The small garden where Sarah grew her vegetables had vanished. Even the air smelled wrong. It smelled of dirt and something else, something cold and final. It smelled like death. Leo looked at his father. Thomas stood in the doorway, silent. He didn't move. His eyes looked empty, fixed on the ruined land before him. And for the first time in his life, Leo saw his father, the strongest man he knew, look completely defeated. The land had not just died. It had turned into a weapon against them. This was not just another storm. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that people would later call the Dust Bowl. In the days that followed, everything blurred together. A long, gray, miserable time. There was no recovery, because there was nothing left to recover. The farm was gone. The topsoil, the rich, life-giving layer of earth, had been blown away, carried hundreds of miles to the east by the wind. What was left was a hard, barren wasteland. Nothing would grow there. Even if they had seeds, there was no rain to help them live. Let's stop for a moment and look at that word, barren. It's spelled B-A-R-R-E-N. Barren. If a place is barren, it means that it cannot produce life. Nothing grows there. No trees, no grass, no flowers. A desert is a barren place. Now, the beautiful fields of Oklahoma had become barren. They were empty, lifeless, silent. The family's small savings began to run out. Sarah did her best to stretch their food. She made every meal smaller, thinner, simpler.
A small piece of bread.
A bowl of soup made mostly of water. Meat became a rare treat, something they might only taste once in a week, or not at all. Leo was always hungry. He could feel it like a stone in his stomach. He saw the worry in his mother's eyes as she looked into their nearly empty pantry, trying to think of what she could make next. But hunger wasn't the only pain. There was also idleness, the strange, heavy feeling of having nothing to do. For the first time in his life, Leo's father had no work, no seeds to plant, no fields to plow, no animals to care for. He still woke up early, as farmers do, but there was no reason to. He would just stand on the porch, his hands hanging by his sides, staring out at the endless brown land. The world he had built with his own hands had turned to dust before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The farm was gone. Their savings were gone. Their hope for the future in this place was gone too. All that was left was a small chance, a tiny spark of hope, shone in that bright, colorful piece of paper from California. That evening, Thomas called the family together. They sat in the small living room. The air felt heavy, as if even the house knew what was coming. Thomas spoke slowly and carefully. His voice was calm, but Leo could see the sadness in his father's eyes. "We're going to leave," he said quietly. "We're going to California. We'll find work there. We'll find a new home." For a moment, no one said anything. The words hung in the air like dust. Then Clara, who was only 6 years old, began to cry. "But I don't want a new home," she said through her tears. "I like our home." Her small voice broke everyone's heart. Leo felt something tighten in his stomach. The idea of leaving scared him deeply. He had lived on this farm all his life. Every tree, every fence, every sound of the wind was part of his world. Leaving it behind felt like leaving part of himself. But when he looked at his father, he saw more than fear. He saw strength. He saw determination. Let's look at that word, determination. D-E-T-R-M-I-N-A-T-I-O-N. Determination means not giving up, even when something is very hard. It means continuing to try, no matter how difficult life becomes. Thomas had that kind of determination. His face was tired, his hands rough and dry, but his eyes showed a quiet strength. He had made a choice, and he was going to stand by it. Sarah, Leo's mother, touched her husband's arm gently. "He's right," she said softly. "There's nothing left for us here. We have to go." And that was it. The decision was made. They would leave their home in Oklahoma and travel west to California. They would join thousands of other families who were doing the same thing, families whose farms had turned to dust. All of them were following the same dream, the same hope printed on those colorful papers. They were about to become migrants, travelers in their own country, searching for a new beginning. The next few days were full of sadness and busy work. The family had to decide what to take and what to leave behind. When you have to pack your whole life into one small truck, you realize how few things are truly important. Their truck was old and worn out. People often called cars like that jalopies. Jalopy, jalopy. A jalopy is an old car that still runs but is in bad shape. It might rattle, shake, or make funny noises, but it keeps going, just barely. Their jalopy was old and tired, but it was all they had. Thomas spent an entire day trying to fix it. He wasn't a real mechanic, but like most farmers, he knew a little about how machines worked. He changed the oil. He checked the engine and tightened a few loose bolts. He looked at the thin tires and hoped they would last. He prayed that the old truck would be strong enough to carry them more than 1,000 miles, across hot deserts and tall mountains, all the way to California. Inside the house, Sarah was packing their belongings. It was the hardest job she had ever done. Every single thing she touched held a memory. The big wooden dining table where they had eaten every meal together, it was too large to fit in the truck. They had to leave it. The rocking chair where she had sung lullabies to her children, it had to stay. Clara's dolls, Leo's favorite books, there was no space for them either. Leo watched his mother as she worked. Her face was sad and quiet. It was more than just packing. It was like saying goodbye to their life. Each item she placed in a box or left behind carried a piece of their story. The farm had been their world, the place where Leo was born, where Clara learned to walk, where Thomas and Sarah had built a life together. Now they had to let it all go. The next morning, the sun rose weakly over the dusty land. The air was dry and still. Their old jalopy stood outside, packed high with their few remaining things, some clothes, a few pots and pans, blankets, and a small box of food. As Leo looked back at the house for the last time, his throat felt tight. The windows were covered in dust, and the garden was gone. But in his heart, it still felt like home. Thomas started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and then came to life. Slowly, the truck began to move down the dirt road, leaving behind a cloud of brown dust. Leo looked out the window and whispered goodbye. They were heading west, chasing the promise of green fields, blue skies, and a new beginning. They could take only the most useful things with them: a mattress to sleep on, some blankets to keep warm, a few pots and pans for cooking, a small box of tools, and just enough clothes for each of them to wear on the long trip. Sarah moved slowly as she packed. Every item she touched had a memory. She carefully placed the family photographs into a small wooden box. "We have to take these," she said quietly, "so we can remember who we are." She also packed a tiny cloth bag filled with seeds from her vegetable garden. It might have seemed strange to take seeds when they no longer had any land to plant them in. But to Sarah, those seeds were a symbol of hope. The hope that someday, somewhere, she would have a little garden again. Leo was given a small wooden crate for his own things. He didn't have much, but to him, each object was special. There was the small wooden toy car his father had carved for him, the slingshot he used to chase rabbits, and his favorite book of adventure stories. He sat on his bed for a long time, staring at them. How could he choose what to leave behind? In the end, he picked up the book. It was old and the pages were worn, but he loved it. If I can't be home, he thought, maybe I can still travel in my imagination. He hoped the stories would keep him company on the long road ahead. Packing was not just work, it was a lesson in letting go. They were saying goodbye to their old lives, one piece at a time. As the boxes filled, the rooms grew emptier. It was as if the house itself was slowly fading away. The family felt something deep and heavy: desperation. Let's look at that word. Desperation. Desperation means a feeling of being trapped in a terrible situation and being willing to do anything to escape it. When people feel desperation, they take big risks because they have no other choice. That was how the family felt. Staying in Oklahoma meant hunger and dust, a slow end. Leaving meant danger and the unknown. But it also meant a chance. And even a small chance was better than none. On their last day, they sold almost everything they owned. The dining table, the chairs, the farm tools, even the chickens. Another farmer, one who had decided to stay, came to buy what he could. He didn't pay much. No one had much money anymore. But even a few dollars could mean food or gas for the road. When everything was gone, the house felt empty and strange. The walls echoed when they spoke. It didn't feel like a home anymore, only a shell, a wooden box full of memories. The morning they left, the sky was still a dull, dusty brown. The air smelled dry and bitter. There were no birds singing, no sounds of life, just silence. There were no big goodbyes either. They had said all there was to say. Thomas sat behind the steering wheel. Sarah was beside him, holding little Clara, who was asleep in her arms. Leo climbed into the back of the old truck, sitting on the mattress surrounded by their few belongings. Thomas turned the key. The engine coughed loudly, shook for a moment, and then began to run. Without a word, he pressed the pedal and the truck started to move down the dirt road. He didn't look back. He couldn't, but Leo did. He watched through the dusty window as the small wooden house grew smaller and smaller behind them. He could see the big oak tree, the empty fields, and the faded barn. Slowly, they all disappeared into the brown haze. A single tear rolled down his cheek, leaving a clean line on his dusty skin. He was leaving the only world he had ever known. He didn't know what waited for them ahead. Maybe a better life, maybe more hardship. But they were moving forward. The truck rumbled down the road, and the wind blew past his face. For the first time in a long time, the air felt alive. They were heading west. They were chasing hope. They had hit the road. Hitting the road. This expression, to hit the road, is a very common idiom in American English. It means to begin a journey. You might say to your friend, "It's getting late. I think it's time to hit the road." Leo's family was now hitting the road, heading west on Route 66, the long highway that crossed half of America. It was already becoming famous as the main road for thousands of families just like them, families who had lost their farms and were searching for a new beginning in the land of sunshine and oranges. The first few days on the road were strange and full of new sights. The sun seemed brighter, the sky wider, and the world much bigger than Leo had ever imagined. But everything was seen through a constant layer of dust. It hung in the air, covered their clothes, and even turned their hair brown. Route 66 was not like the smooth, modern highways we know today. In many places, it was just a narrow, bumpy dirt road full of holes and rocks. And it was crowded, full of trucks, cars, and families heading west. It looked like a moving river made of metal and people, a river of desperation flowing toward California. All around them were vehicles that looked as tired and worn as their own. Old trucks with missing paint, patched up cars that coughed and rattled, and even wagons pulled by horses. Some families had built small wooden trailers by hand and tied everything they owned on top. Mattresses, furniture, pots, pans, and children, all traveling together, all chasing the same fragile dream. Leo would look at the other children as they passed by. Their faces were covered with dust, and their eyes looked serious and older than they should have been. He could see his own fear and confusion reflected back at him. Even though they were strangers, Leo felt connected to them. They were all part of something bigger, a moving world of families traveling together through the same struggle. Let's look at a word that describes this feeling: community. Community. Community means a group of people who live in the same place or share something important in common. Your school is a community. Your neighborhood is a community. And the people on Route 66, all traveling from the same place to the same place for the same reason, had become a temporary community. They didn't have houses or towns, but they had each other. They were, as another idiom says, in the same boat. This means to be in the same difficult situation as someone else. All the families on Route 66 were in the same boat. They had lost their homes, their land, and their old lives. Now they shared the same hope, to find work and start again. At night, when the sky turned dark and the stars appeared, the families would pull their trucks over to the side of the road and make small camps. They didn't have tents. They slept in their trucks, or on mattresses spread out on the ground. Thomas would build a little fire using pieces of wood he found by the road. Sarah would cook a simple meal, maybe beans or potatoes, cooked in a small pot over the flames. The smell of smoke mixed with the cool night air. Leo would lie beside his sister, staring up at the stars, listening to the crackling fire and the soft voices of his parents. Other families camped nearby. You could hear babies crying, pots clanging, and people murmuring to each other in low voices. Sometimes the men would gather together around a single fire. They would talk quietly, sharing bits of news or warnings from other travelers. "I heard there's no water for the next 100 miles, one man might say. Another might add, "Someone told me the police are turning people back at the Arizona border." No one knew what was true and what was just rumor, but they listened anyway. They shared fears, advice, and sometimes even food. When a car broke down, which happened often, the other travelers would stop. The men would take out their tools and work together, trying to fix the broken engine or replace a tire. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Leo found this fascinating. He watched his father, a man who had always been quiet and private, suddenly join in with these strangers. He saw them helping each other without question, lending tools, sharing water, offering food. There was a silent understanding between them, a kind of friendship that didn't need many words. They all knew the same kind of pain. There is a powerful word for this kind of connection: solidarity. Solidarity. Solidarity means a feeling of unity, when people stand together because they share the same goals, struggles, or hopes. The families on the road felt solidarity. They were not just travelers, they were survivors. Each person's strength gave others the courage to keep going. One evening, as the sun sank low and the world turned golden, their old truck began to shake. There was a loud pop, followed by the harsh sound of rubber scraping against the road. Thomas stopped the truck. They had a flat tire. A kind stranger and a cruel world. Thomas pulled the truck to the side of the road. His face looked tired and worried. The tire was flat. The spare tire they had was old and thin, almost useless. He tried to change it, but it was hard work in the hot sun. A few minutes later, another car slowed down and stopped behind them. A man got out. He was thin, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Looks like you've got some trouble," he said. He introduced himself as John. He was traveling west with his wife and 2 young sons. When John saw their spare tire, he shook his head slowly. "That one won't last you 10 miles, he said. "Here, take mine. It's not new, but it's better than that one." Thomas looked shocked. "I can't take your tire," he said. "What if you get a flat later?" John smiled, a tired but warm smile. "We'll worry about that when it happens," he said. "We're all in this together, aren't we?" Then he knelt beside Thomas and helped him change the tire. While they worked, John's wife walked over and gave Sarah a small brown bag. Inside were a few apples for the children. Sarah thanked her softly, her eyes wet with tears. To Leo's family, those apples were more than food. They were hope. It was a small act of kindness, but it felt like a miracle. It reminded them that even in the hardest times, there were still good people in the world. But not everyone they met was kind. As they traveled further west, out of Oklahoma and away from the Dust Bowl, things began to change. In towns across Texas and New Mexico, they started to see signs in shop windows. Some said, "No Okies." Okie was a nickname for someone from Oklahoma. At first, it was just a simple word, but now people were using it as an insult. It meant you were poor, dirty, and not welcome. Leo learned this the hard way one hot afternoon. They stopped at a small gas station. The family only had enough money for a few gallons of gas. Sarah gave Leo a shiny nickel. "Go buy a piece of candy for you and Clara," she said. Leo smiled. It had been weeks since he had tasted anything sweet. He ran into the little store, full of excitement. Behind the counter stood a large man with a hard, unfriendly face. "What do you want?" the man asked. His voice was cold. Leo held out his nickel. "A piece of candy, please," he said politely. The man looked at Leo's dusty clothes, his messy hair, and his dirty face. Then he sneered. Let's look at that word, sneer. S-N-E-R. A sneer is an ugly kind of smile. It is a smile that shows no respect, a smile that says, "I think I'm better than you." The man sneered and said, "We don't serve your kind here. Get out." Leo blinked, confused. "My kind? I'm just." "You're an Okie," the man snapped. "Now get out of my store before I call the sheriff." Leo's face turned red. He felt hot with shame and anger. He ran out of the store, tears filling his eyes. He didn't understand. Why did this man hate him? He had never done anything wrong. He was just a boy who wanted a piece of candy. When he told his parents what had happened, Thomas's face turned hard. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. For a moment, Leo thought his father might go back inside. But he didn't. Thomas just paid for the gas and drove away in silence. The car was quiet. The only sound was the engine and the wind. Leo stared out the window, trying not to cry. This was a new kind of pain. It was not like hunger or dust. This was a pain that came from people, from their cruelty and judgment. They were being treated as if they were less than human, simply because of where they came from and because they were poor. This was prejudice. Let's look at that word, prejudice. Prejudice. Prejudice means having an unfair or unreasonable opinion about someone before you really know them. The store owner didn't know Leo. He didn't know his family's story. But he judged them anyway just because they were from Oklahoma. This was a hard lesson for Leo. He realized that the world was not only difficult, it could also be cruel. The long journey was taking its toll on everyone. They were all thinner now. Their faces were burned by the sun and rough from the wind. But the journey was hardest on the old jalopy, the truck that carried their lives. The engine groaned and wheezed under the heavy load. Sometimes it overheated, and Thomas had to pull over and wait for it to cool down. Crossing the mountains was the worst part. The roads were steep, the turns sharp, and the brakes were weak. Every time they went downhill, Sarah held her breath, clutching the children close. The truck rattled and shook, its wheels slipping on the loose dirt. Leo closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. He didn't pray for money or comfort. He just prayed they would make it safely to California, to that faraway land they had seen on the handbill, the land of sunshine and oranges. Every strange new sound from the old truck made the family stop breathing for a moment. Each rattle, each cough, each small pop from the engine made their hearts race. They were terrified that one of these sounds would be the last one, the moment when the truck finally died for good. And one hot afternoon, in the middle of the endless Arizona desert, that moment came. There was a loud bang, then a terrible grinding sound, and finally, silence. The truck slowed, coughed once, and rolled to a stop at the side of the road. Thomas turned the key again and again, but the engine was dead. The truck would not start. They were stranded, stuck in the middle of nowhere. The sun was high in the sky, blazing down with no mercy. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground looked like it was melting. There was no shade, no trees, no buildings. Only miles and miles of sand and sky. Cars and trucks passed by, full of other travelers. But none of them stopped. To the people driving by, they were just another broken-down family on the side of the road, one of many. Time passed slowly. The air was silent except for the buzzing of insects and the ticking of the hot metal engine. Then a heavy feeling began to grow inside them, despair. Let's look at that word, despair. Despietar. Despair is a very strong word. It means the feeling that there is no hope left at all. When you feel despair, you believe that nothing will ever get better. As they sat in the heat, watching the cars go by without stopping, the family began to feel despair. Was this the end of their journey? Would they be stuck here forever? Forgotten in the desert? Sarah held the children close, trying to protect them from the burning sun with her body. Thomas stood by the front of the truck with the hood open. He looked at the engine, a silent, greasy, mysterious mess of metal and wires. He wasn't a mechanic. He didn't know what to do. He touched the engine, looked around helplessly, and then kicked one of the tires in frustration. The sound echoed in the still, hot air. Then something broke inside him. For the first time since the journey began, Leo saw his father give up. Thomas sat down on the side of the road. He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, and he began to cry, quiet, painful sobs. Leo had never seen his father cry before. To him, his father had always been strong and calm, someone who could fix anything. Seeing him like this, broken, hopeless, was the most frightening thing Leo had ever seen. It felt like the whole world was ending. But then something changed. Sarah, who had been quiet and fearful for most of the journey, suddenly stood up. She walked over to her husband and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Thomas," she said firmly. Her voice was not weak or soft anymore. It was strong, stronger than Leo had ever heard it before. "Crying isn't going to fix this," she said. "We are not going to die here." Thomas looked up at her, his eyes red and full of shock. Sarah looked back at him. Her face, which had once looked gentle and tired, now looked hard and determined, like steel. "Now get up," she said. Then she turned to Leo. "Leo," she said, "take the water jug and start walking down the road. If you see a town, a house, or a gas station, tell them we need help. Clara and I will stay here with your father." Leo froze. Walk alone in the desert? The thought scared him more than anything. The road stretched on forever in both directions. The sun was burning his skin, and the land looked empty. But when he looked at his mother's face, so strong and sure, something inside him changed too. He felt a small spark of her strength enter him. He nodded. He took the jug of water in both hands and began to walk. The road was so hot that he could feel the heat through the thin soles of his shoes. His mouth was dry. His skin felt tight and sticky with sweat. The sun was relentless, but he kept going. He was no longer just a boy. He was part of the family's survival now. He had a job to do, and he would not stop until it was done. This moment was a turning point for all of them. It was the moment they realized that they could not rely on only one person's strength. They had to rely on each other. Each of them, Thomas, Sarah, Leo, and even little Clara, had an important part to play in getting through this. The journey was not only changing where they lived, it was changing who they were. After what felt like hours of walking under the blazing Arizona sun, Leo saw something shimmering in the distance. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the light caused by heat and exhaustion. But as he got closer, the shape became clearer. It was something real, a blessing in disguise. At first, Leo thought the shimmering thing in the distance was a mirage. A mirage is something that looks real, but is only an illusion caused by heat. The desert could play tricks on your eyes. But as he got closer, he realized it was real. It was a small, dusty gas station with a single pump outside and a little garage attached. The building looked old and forgotten, but there was a man standing outside, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. Leo's heart beat fast. He felt hope, but he was also afraid. He ran to the man as quickly as he could, his legs moving over the hot asphalt, his chest rising and falling with excitement. He told the man everything about their broken-down truck and how stranded they were in the middle of the desert. The man listened quietly. He had a kind, worn face. He introduced himself as Al. Al had seen hundreds of families like Leo's before.
He sighed, then nodded.
"All right, son," Al said gently. "Let's go take a look at it." He got into his tow truck and drove Leo back to their broken jalopy. When they arrived, Thomas looked up, his face red with shame. He felt embarrassed that it had been his young son who found help, not him. But Al only gave him a friendly nod. He opened the hood and studied the engine for a long time.
"Finally," he said at last.
"Well, the good news is I can fix it. The bad news is it will take a day or two, and it will cost you $20. $20. To Leo, it sounded like $1 million. He knew their family did not have that much money. Thomas's face fell.
Despair returned.
"We don't have it," he said quietly. "We only have $5. Al was silent for a moment. He looked at the tired, dusty family. He looked at Sarah holding sleepy little Clara. He looked at Leo, whose face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but whose eyes were full of hope. Al sighed again. "Look," he said, "I can't do it for free. I have a family to feed too. But here's what I can do. I'll fix your truck. Then you can work for me for a few days to pay for it. You, son," he said, pointing at Leo, "you can help me clean the garage. And you," he said to Thomas, "you can help me fix the fence out back." Relief washed over the family. Leo felt his knees go weak. It was an incredible offer, a chance to survive, to keep moving, to find safety. Thomas agreed immediately, his voice thick with gratitude. Al towed the jalopy into his garage and let the family sleep in a small, clean room behind it. For the first time in weeks, they slept under a solid roof. Sarah cooked a simple meal on Al's stove, using some fresh vegetables his wife had given them. For the next 2 days, Leo and his father worked harder than they had in a long time. Thomas repaired the fence in the hot sun, using his farmer's hands. The work felt familiar and comforting to him. Leo swept the greasy garage floor, organized tools, and helped Al with small tasks. He watched Al work on the truck engine, fascinated by its complexity. Al was patient and kind. He explained what he was doing and taught Leo the names of the engine parts, like the carburetor and the distributor. Leo realized that survival was not just about knowing one thing. It was about being willing to learn new skills. What had seemed like a disaster, the broken truck in the desert, had become a valuable lesson. This is a perfect example of a common saying, a blessing in disguise. A blessing is something good. A disguise is something that hides the truth. So, a blessing in disguise is a situation that seems bad at first but turns out to be good. For example, losing a job might be a blessing in disguise if it leads you to a better job later. For Leo's family, the broken truck was a blessing in disguise. It led them to meet Al, who fixed their truck, helped them, and gave them a safe place to rest. Finally, after 2 days of hard work, the truck was ready. Their jobs were done. It was time to leave. Thomas tried to thank Al, but he could not find the right words. Al only smiled and clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "You just get your family to California safely," he said. "That is all the thanks I need." As they drove away, Leo turned and waved to Al, who was standing in the doorway of his garage. Leo knew he would never forget the kindness of this man in the middle of the desert. Al reminded them that the world was not only full of cruelty and unfairness. It was also full of unexpected goodness. The rest of the journey over the mountains was very hard. The sun was hot, the road was steep, and the old truck groaned under the weight of their family and their belongings. But finally, one afternoon, they reached the top of a hill. Below them, spreading as far as their eyes could see, was a wide green valley. It was the Central Valley of California. After months of seeing only brown and gray, the bright green of the valley was shocking. It looked exactly like the picture on the handbill that had promised work and a new life. There were endless fields of vegetables and huge orchards full of fruit trees. To their tired, dust-covered eyes, it looked like paradise. It looked like the promised land. A wave of hope filled the small truck. Sarah whispered, tears running down her face. "We made it. We actually made it." They drove down into the green valley, believing their hardest struggles were finally over. But they did not know that this was only the beginning of a new set of challenges. Up close, the green valley looked very different. Yes, there was work, but there were also thousands of other families, just like them, who had followed the promises on handbills. There were far more workers than there were jobs. This made the farm owners very powerful. They could pay the workers almost nothing because if one family complained, 100 more were ready to take the job. Leo's family learned this very quickly. On their first day, they found a large farm hiring people to pick cotton. The boss, a big man with a hard face, told them the pay. It was so low it was barely enough to buy food for a single day. But the family was desperate. They had no other choice. They took the job. Everyone in the family had to work. Thomas, Sarah, and even 10-year-old Leo. Little Clara was too young, so she stayed at the edge of the field, watching her family work. The work was extremely hard. From early in the morning until late in the evening, They bent over in the scorching California sun. The cotton plants were prickly and scratched their hands. Their backs ached from bending all day. At the end of each day, their bags of cotton were weighed, and they were given only a few cents for their work. It was exhausting. It was soul-crushing. Let's look at that word. Soul-crushing. Soulcrushing. It is an adjective that describes something so hard and unfair that it makes you feel hopeless and tired inside. A very long, difficult day at work, or a problem that never seems to end, can feel soul-crushing. This was how life felt for Leo's family in the cotton fields. Even though they had escaped the Dust Bowl and the desert, they still had to fight to survive every single day. This is a very strong expression. Soul is the part of you that is deepest, your feelings, your spirit. To crush something means to press it until it breaks. So soul-crushing work is work that is so hard, so unpleasant, and so unfair that it feels like it is breaking your spirit. It leaves you feeling empty, tired, and hopeless. This was how the work in the cotton fields felt for Leo's family. They had nowhere to live. The farm owners did not give any housing. So, like hundreds of other migrant families, they had to live in a temporary camp by the river. This kind of camp was often called a Hooverville. Hoverville, Hooverville. The name was meant to be sarcastic. Herbert Hoover was the President of the United States at that time. Many people blamed him for the Great Depression, a terrible economic crisis that made millions of families poor. So people called these camps after him. A Hooverville was made of small tents and shacks. They were built from pieces of wood, metal, and cardboard. There was no clean water. There were no toilets. It was crowded and dirty. This was the paradise they had traveled over 1,000 miles to reach. Life in the camp was a daily struggle. Sarah cooked tiny meals over an open fire. A meager meal is a very small meal, not enough to fill your stomach. They were always hungry, always tired, and always worried. The dream of California had turned into a nightmare. They were free, but they were trapped by poverty. They were in a beautiful land, but they were living in terrible conditions. This is a good example of irony. Irony. Irony is when something happens in a way that is very different from what you expect. It was ironic that they had traveled to a land full of food, a place where so much was being grown, only to be hungrier than ever before. Even though life was hard, a sense of community began to grow in the Hooverville, just like it had on the road. The families looked after each other. The women shared food when they could. They helped each other watch the children. They washed their clothes together by the river. They shared stories and worries. In the middle of hardship, they found comfort in knowing they were not alone. Leo started to make a few friends. They were boys his age who also worked in the cotton fields. They did not play much. Most of the time, they were too tired from working all day. But sometimes in the evening, they would sit by the river and talk quietly. They talked about their old homes, the places they had left behind. They also talked about their dreams for the future. These small moments of friendship gave them a little bit of normal life in the middle of all the hardship. But the hard life in the camp was affecting everyone, especially the youngest children and the oldest adults. People got sick very easily in the dirty and crowded conditions. There were no doctors because no one had money to pay for them. One evening, little Clara began to feel very warm. By the next morning, she had a high fever and a terrible cough. It was the dust pneumonia they had feared back in Oklahoma. Dust pneumonia is a sickness caused by breathing in dust for a long time. Sarah tried everything she knew to help Clara. She gave her cool water from the river to bathe. She made her a very thin soup. But Clara only got worse. She was very weak, barely moving, and her breathing became short and difficult. Leo was terrified. He watched his little sister lying on the small, dirty mattress inside their tiny shack. A cold feeling of fear filled his heart. He saw the panic in his parents' eyes. This was the worst thing they could imagine. They had come all the way to California to save their family, and now their youngest child was very sick. Thomas, Leo's father, ran to the farm boss. He begged for some money in advance, just a few dollars, so they could try to take Clara to a doctor. But the boss laughed at him. "If you need money, work harder," he said, and walked away. That night was the longest night of Leo's life. Clara was burning with fever, and her breathing was hard. Sarah stayed beside her, holding her small hand and singing softly, while tears ran down her cheeks. Thomas paced outside like an angry, trapped animal. His face was full of helpless anger. Leo felt a strong anger inside him, too. It was not fair. It was not right. Clara was a sweet, innocent little girl. She had done nothing wrong. They had worked hard. They had followed the rules. Why were they being punished?
He knew he had to do something.
He could not just watch his sister die. He remembered Al, the kind man in Arizona who had helped them before. He remembered the strength his mother had shown when the truck broke down. Leo was no longer just a small boy. He was part of this family, and now he had a job to fight for his sister's life. He quietly slipped out of the shack. He knew that another family in the camp, the Jacksons, had a car that still worked. He ran to their tent and woke up Mr. Jackson. He explained quickly what was happening. Without any hesitation, Mr. Jackson agreed to help. He said he knew a small county hospital about 30 miles away.
It was for poor people.
Maybe they would help Clara. The whole family got into Mr. Jackson's old car. Thomas carried Clara, wrapped in a thin blanket. They drove through the night, the darkness making the long journey even harder. Finally, they reached the hospital. It was small and simple. A tired-looking nurse at the front desk asked them to wait. They sat in the waiting room, anxious and exhausted, for what felt like many hours. Finally, a doctor came out. He examined Clara carefully. Then he told them she was very sick. She had pneumonia and was also suffering from malnutrition. Malnutrition means the body does not get enough food and vitamins to be healthy. Malnutrition is a serious condition. It happens when a person does not get enough food or when they do not get the right kinds of food to stay healthy. Clara was very weak because of malnutrition, and the doctor said they would have to keep her in the hospital. He could not promise that she would be okay, but he said they would try their best. Leaving Clara in the hospital was the hardest thing Thomas and Sarah had ever done. They felt as if a part of them was being left behind. But they knew this was the only chance to save her life. Mr. Jackson drove them back to the camp quietly, without speaking. The next few days were a living hell. During the day, Thomas, Sarah, and Leo worked in the cotton fields, but their minds and hearts were far away in the small hospital room. Every moment, they wondered if Clara was alive or dead. All they could do was work, wait, and pray. During these days, Leo noticed a new side of his father. The deep despair that Thomas had shown earlier was gone. In its place was determination, a quiet, strong will to keep going. He worked harder than ever, picking more cotton than anyone else. Every penny he earned might help pay for Clara's care. Thomas moved like a man with a purpose, driven by love and hope. After 5 long, stressful days, Mr. Jackson agreed to take them back to the hospital. As they walked down the clean, quiet hallway, their hearts were pounding with fear. The doctor came out to meet them. He smiled a small, tired smile. "She's a fighter, your daughter," he said. "Her fever is down. She is still weak, but she's going to be okay." Relief washed over the family like a flood. Sarah collapsed into Thomas's arms, crying with joy. Leo felt as if he could finally breathe again. They went into Clara's room and saw her sleeping peacefully in a clean white bed. She was pale and thin, but she was breathing easily. She was alive. Looking at his sleeping sister, Leo realized something very important. Their dream of finding wealth in California had been foolish. The real treasure was not the green fields or the promise of money. The real treasure was their family. It was the love they had for each other. This love had been tested by dust, hunger, prejudice, and sickness, but it had not broken. Clara's sickness became a turning point for the family. When she was well enough to leave the hospital, they returned to the migrant camp. But something had changed inside them. They were no longer just chasing a fantasy printed on a handbill. They were survivors. They had faced the worst challenges, and they were still together. This new understanding gave them a special kind of strength. Life was still very hard. They still worked long hours in the fields. But now they faced each day with a different attitude. They learned to notice and enjoy small moments of happiness. In the evenings, they would listen to a man in the camp play his guitar. His sad but beautiful songs told the story of their lives. Listening to them made the family feel less alone. Sarah, with her small bag of seeds, found a tiny forgotten patch of land behind their shack. She started a little garden. It was amazing to watch the small green shoots grow up through the poor soil. That little garden became a symbol of the family's resilience. Resilience is the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. It is the ability to bounce back from difficulty. A plant that grows through a crack in the concrete shows resilience. A person who loses their job but starts a new successful business shows resilience. Sarah's garden was a sign that, no matter how hard life got, the family could survive and grow. Leo's family had learned a very important lesson: resilience. They had faced many problems and hardships, and many times it seemed that life would knock them down for good. But each time they got back up. They kept moving forward, no matter how hard things were. One day, news spread through the camp that there was work in a different part of California, picking peaches. The pay was said to be a little better than in the cotton fields. Many families were afraid to move again. They had just started to get used to the camp, and moving meant leaving the little stability they had found. But Thomas and Sarah decided to take the chance. They felt that sometimes taking a risk was necessary to improve their life. They said goodbye to the friends they had made in the camp. This included Mr. Jackson, the kind man who had helped them when Clara was sick. They packed their few belongings into the old jalopy once more. This time, when they hit the road, it felt different. They were not running from danger or hardship anymore. This time, they were moving towards something better. They had a small but real opportunity. When they arrived at the peach orchards, Leo was amazed. The orchards were full of beautiful trees with soft, red and yellow peaches. The work was still hard, but it was better than the cotton fields. They were paid a little more, and the farm owner gave them a slightly better place to live. It was not a real house, but a small wooden cabin with a solid roof and a floor. For Leo's family, this cabin felt like a palace after all the tents and shacks they had lived in. Life started to change for Leo. The work in the orchards was seasonal. Sometimes there were days or even weeks when there was no fruit to pick. During one of these quiet periods, a woman came to the camp. She was a teacher who wanted to help the children of the migrant workers. She set up a small school in a large tent. At first, many of the children, including Leo, were not interested in going to school. School seemed like a strange thing from another life. But Leo's mother, Sarah, insisted he go. "Your father and I work with our hands," she told him. "But I want you to work with your mind.
I want you to have a choice.
I want you to learn and to think." Leo listened to his mother. He went to the tent school, and he soon discovered that he loved learning. The teacher was kind and patient. She taught the children to read, to write, and to do arithmetic. For Leo, opening a book was like opening a door to a different world. The books allowed him to escape, even for a little while, from the hard reality of life in the fields. He read every book the teacher had. He learned about history, science, and places far away. His mind, which had once been focused only on survival, began to grow. He started to dream again, but these were different dreams. They were not dreams about becoming rich or famous. These were dreams about knowledge, understanding the world, and discovering new ideas. The years passed. The family continued to move following the seasons and the harvests, from peaches to grapes to oranges. They never became rich. They remained poor, but they were no longer desperate. They had found a rhythm to their life. Thomas eventually found more stable work. Because he was hardworking and reliable, he became a foreman, a small leader of a group of workers. Slowly, they were able to save a little bit of money. Eventually, they rented a small, proper house in a small town. For the first time in years, they had a home that was not a shack or a tent. Clara grew up healthy and strong. Leo stayed in school and worked hard both in the fields and with his studies. He became a brilliant student. He graduated from high school with top honors. The story of Leo's family does not end with them finding a pot of gold. Life does not usually work that way. The real story is in the journey itself, the struggles they faced, the lessons they learned, and the love that held them together. They did not find the paradise they had imagined in California, but they built a real life, a life full of both hardship and love. They learned that home is not a place on a map. Home is the people you love and who love you. They learned that strength is not about how much you have or how easy life is. True strength is about how much you can endure, how much you can survive, and how much you can keep going when things are hard. Through all the dust, hunger, sickness, and fear, Leo's family had grown stronger. They had learned to support each other, to work together, and to never give up. They had learned to face life with courage, hope, and resilience. And that made all the difference. Leo, the small boy who left a dusty farm in Oklahoma, grew up to be a young man who understood many important things. He learned the value of kindness, the pain of prejudice, the importance of community, and the power of resilience. He carried the lessons of the long, dusty road with him for the rest of his life. The Dust Bowl and the Great Depression were very hard times in American history. Many families lost almost everything, but for the families who survived, it was also a story of the incredible human spirit. It was proof that people can keep going, even when life is very difficult. Think about the journey of Leo's family. They were simple farmers at the beginning, living a simple life. Then nature and money problems took almost everything from them. They were forced to leave their home and travel on a long road full of danger and uncertainty. They faced hunger, sickness, and fear. They almost lost their youngest daughter, Clara. And yet, they did not give up. They did not break. What kept them together? It was not money. It was not luck. It was their love and care for each other. It was the moment Sarah became strong when Thomas felt hopeless. It was the moment Leo took responsibility and walked alone to find help. It was the way the family worked together to save Clara. Their bond, their family love, was what held them together. This story is not only about a family in a certain time in America. It is a story about life, about what really matters. It is about the things that are important in all of our lives, no matter where we come from or what we face. Through this story, we also learned many English words. Words to describe places, like barren and desolate. Words to describe feelings, like desperation, determination, and solidarity. We also learned idioms like to be in the same boat, a blessing in disguise, and to hit the road. But more importantly, this story teaches us about life. Learning English is similar to Leo's family's journey. Sometimes it feels hard. Sometimes you feel like you are alone, like you are stuck in the desert. Sometimes people are unkind or do not understand you. Sometimes it feels easier to give up. But there are also good moments. Moments of kindness from others. Moments when you connect with someone and feel solidarity, a sense that you are not alone. Moments when you look back and realize how far you have come. To learn a language, you need the same things Leo's family had: resilience, the ability to keep going after difficulty; determination, the willingness to continue, even when it is hard; and the love for what you are learning, the desire to grow and improve. Leo's family teaches us that life is a journey. It is full of hard times and good times. And if you stay together, help each other, and never give up, you can face anything. Learning English, like life, is a journey. Keep going, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself. And it is always helpful to remember why you started your journey in the first place. Maybe you started to connect with other people, to understand the world, or to build a better future for yourself. I want to thank you for coming on this long journey with me today. Sharing stories like this is what I love most about what I do here at the Super English Talks. Stories are powerful. They help us learn new things, they help us understand life, and they help us understand what it really means to be human. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you feel that you learned something valuable today, I have a small favor to ask. Please take a moment to subscribe or follow our podcast wherever you listen. And the most important thing, please turn on the notification bell. By doing this, you will be the first to know when we release our next story, our next lesson, or our next journey together. It will also help our community grow, and it will make sure you never miss a chance to practice your listening and improve your English. Thank you again for your time, your attention, and for joining me today. My name is Jara, and I look forward to sharing another story with you very soon.